I don't. I'm good. I want to thank the members of the board to be with us today, but also want to thank for being here in St. John Parish today. Members of our state that has become all too familiar with the impacts of hurricanes. And as we've said repeatedly, coming off of two unprecedented hurricane seasons in South Louisiana, this was really ground zero for Hurricane Ida. And the impacts here were very familiar from the impacts that we saw from Hurricane Isaac several years ago. And so we're going to be getting some updates on two major projects that are underway for this area, the West Shore Lake Pontchartrain system, as well as the Mississippi River reintroduction into Maurepas Swamp, and an update on our coastal master plan, as well as an implementation update from Mr. Haas. But it's just good to be here out of Baton Rouge. Actually, has really come a long way since Hurricane Ida. And I want to say this as I call Parish President Hotard up. A parish that is restoration on the whole mission of so under the last few years under President Hotard's leadership. And so it's great. We have President Hotard with us this morning. She's going to come to the table and give us some welcoming remarks. So you can go right here to this table, Jacqueline. But Jacqueline, thank you for having us in your parish this morning. And we look forward to hearing from you.
Morning. It's so nice to see everyone. You're right, Chip, right here in St. John. I know we, like many of the parishes in the region, I saw Guy McGinnis is here in St. Bernard. We really took it on the chin. So I appreciate you all coming to St. John, seeing some of the progress and still seeing some of the destruction. In fact, we have a facility not far from us that we're waiting to be demolished, and we're at the mercy of labor and supply chain like everyone else. And are waiting just for some electrical components to be removed so that we can demolish structures. So the recovery is happening, but it's slow. This is unlike any other disaster, like a Hurricane Isaac. In fact, I flooded for both storms, and in Hurricane Isaac, I think I was back in my home for Thanksgiving because there were no supply chain issues, there were no labor issues. And then here we are for Hurricane Ida 10 years later, and I just got back into my home about 30 days ago because of those supply chain issues. And so this recovery is going to, as we all know, look a little bit different. Thank you to Chip. I just want to say thank you to you, CPRA. You're one of the first phone calls I make when there is a wave anywhere in the Gulf, and your office and you personally, it's always that calm voice, and just your direction, your leadership. At CPRA, it is unparalleled. It means so much to just my small EOC staff. We're not a big staff, so we rely heavily really on your expertise to kind of augment some of our decision making. So I want to thank you for just being that steady voice. Obviously, Casey Tingle's here. We weathered some actual mental storms, as well as the physical storms. So I want to thank you and the members of GOSEP. Dr. Chuck Brown, I joked with Dr. Brown, right now he's obviously the money guy. We've got projects, so I'll say it again on the record. We have some projects. Monica with Monica Gorman, Executive Director of Pontchartrain Levee District, has been just a great partner with the Levee Project. And Mark Wingate and members of the Corps, I want to thank them as well. And I know that West Shore Pontchartrain Levee Project is on this agenda. We're so grateful to see this project still moving along despite all of the challenges that we've had. Really a project that started in 1965 with Hurricane Betsy, and we're finally seeing that project getting off the ground. And I know it's because of the leadership of everyone sitting at this table, and even those individuals who are not at this table that that project is getting off of the ground and will protect us from the flooding that about 4,000 residents in St. John experienced. So again, I just want to thank you all for being here. Thank you for the partnerships. Thank you for coming to visit St. John and our gym. If I would have known there would have been so many people, we'd have gotten more chairs, but we will get some more chairs, because if this goes until 1 o'clock, the bleachers won't be so comfortable in about an hour. I know I was here last night with the Department of Insurance, and after about an hour, that was enough. So with that being said, I will close the floor, but I just want to thank all of you for your leadership. Right now is the most difficult time to be in parish government, to be in government, and to be in the roles that we're in. And I have to remind myself every morning that if it weren't meant for me to be in this position, I would not be. I'm a firm believer of that. And I would share that with all of you, that if you were not meant to be in the role that you're in, whether it's Department of Natural Resources, CPRA, parish government, contractors, you wouldn't be in this role. And it is a difficult, difficult time because of all of the challenges that we're facing. But it is going to continue to take strong leaders like everyone in this room to continue to move our state forward. So I thank you for your service, for what oftentimes is a thankless, brutal job, but that we continue to serve the great people of Louisiana, and for me, the great people of St. John. So thank you. That's it.
Thank you, Madam President, for those remarks. And Inger, if you'd please come forward and call the roll.
Chairman Klein,
Here.
Mr. Lovell,
Here.
Mr. Landry,
Here.
Mr. Banks,
Here.
Secretary Brown,
Here.
Mr. Aboud,
Here.
Mr. Bro,
Here.
Mr. Broussard, Mr. Ince, Ms. Gotro, Mr. Burke, Ms. Gorman, Mr. Bubrick, Mr. Bourgeois, Mr. Hidalgo, Cormier, Mr. Segrera, President McGinnis, Representative Zarang, Senator Hinkins. You have a quorum. Sorry.
All right, thank you, Inger. All right, members, moving along to agenda item number 3, no changes to the agenda at this time. I have a motion by Ms. Goodson, a second by Dr. Brown. Any public comments on the agenda? Any objection to the motion? Motion is approved. Approval of the minutes from the previous board meeting. Got a motion by Mr. Bourgeois, a second by Mr. Hidalgo. Any public comments on the approval of the minutes? Any objection? Motion approved. Agenda item number 5, old business or announcements. Any old business before the board members? I do have just one announcement. We always try to highlight men and women that work within CPRA, and very excited to announce today that the hiring of 2 additional staffers in the outreach and engagement team. Miss Marina Clay, who is a director of outreach and engagement, and I believe Nick Grimion, there's Nick over there. And so you're going to be seeing a lot of them in the future. And so I want to welcome them to Team Coastal, and both of them have hit the ground running. And so it's just great to have them on board. And with that, we're going to hear from Mr. Haas with our implementation update.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Good morning to you and to the board. As always, it's a pleasure to be here with you today. I want to update you on implementation of Louisiana's Coastal Master Plan, as I do each month. Talk with you about some of the progress that's being made across our coast, both in restoring our coastal ecosystems and protecting our citizens from storm surges. So as I do want to, each month, want to let you know how many projects are active currently. Right now, we've got about 102 active projects all across the coast. 35 of those projects are construction projects, like the West Shore Lake Pontchartrain project, which you'll hear about later today. The New Orleans Land Bridge Shoreline Stabilization and Marsh Creation Project, Shoreline Protection Project in Tangipahoa Parish. 59 projects are being designed as we sit here today. Those are projects like the Risk Reduction Project, the East Delaware Bernard Parish, and the Grand Bayou Ridge Blackman's Parish. And then 8 projects are in planning, again, as we sit here today. So those are projects like the Upper Barrett Risk Reduction project on the west bank of this parish here, and then the lower Mississippi River management program as well. So talk again a little bit, some individual projects. The first one I want to mention to you is the South Grand a Quipper project. It's on the Rockefeller Refuge. Wildlife and Fisheries, owned and managed by the Department of Wildlife and Fisheries. A $25 million project. This will restore about 360 Cameron Parish and close to about 1 million cubic yards.
Members, there's a video, there's a screen behind. If you want to see the video, sorry.
So you're seeing a little footage here of one of 2 marsh creation areas, the western marsh creation area. This is a containment dike as part of that area. You see on the left-hand side of the screen, it looks like water, but that's actually just an inch or so of water over new sediment that's been pumped from the Gulf of Mexico into that area that will ultimately be vegetated with marsh. This is a feature in most of our marsh creation areas. It's a weir box or a spill box. As you can imagine, we're dredging sediment from, in this case, the Gulf of Mexico or open bays and lakes. That sediment is slurried with a lot of water. That water and sediment is delivered to an area like you see right here. The sediment settles out. You got to get that water out of that containment area, right? So that spill box that you just saw, or weir box, is how you get the water out but keep the sediment in. This is the access route. The Gulf of Mexico is sort of toward the bottom of the screen. That's the Price Lake Road levee. You can see some of the equipment working there. The pipe is part of the pipeline delivery system for this project. That's just a reverse view. You're looking to the south toward the Gulf of Mexico. Difficult to see, but if you look really hard, you can see the dredge and the distance on the horizon for that project. So excited to have that project near completion, and 360 acres of marsh in Cameron Parish that weren't there just a year or 2 ago. So again, we talk a lot about the work that we do in coastal Louisiana and what it does for our economy. There are 65 non-government jobs that were generated as a result of this project. The Fish and Wildlife Service, I should mention, was our federal sponsor on this project. NRC is actually designed it, and we handled construction at CPRA. But Weeks was a construction contractor, a company with a heavy presence, big office, of course, in Tangipahoa Parish, and Eustis Engineering, headquartered in Metairie, worked on this project as well. I mentioned West Shore Lake Pontchartrain already, and I won't get into this. I know Mr. Wingate is going to talk a good bit more about Mr. Wingate is going to talk a good bit more about this project and some of the details. But I did want to mention, obviously, extremely important to this area for all the reasons that President Hotard and Chairman Klein just mentioned. 18 miles of levee, and again, I won't get into the details because I know Mark will do that later. But what I did want to point out is the partnership that we have in advancing this project and with the Corps of Engineers as well. So, Works project. Hundreds of millions of dollars, as you'll hear a little bit later. So there's kind of 2 responsibilities really for the local sponsors associated with projects like these. The bill for the project, right? We're talking about a 700. That 35% adds up very quickly. It's a large number, but we've also got to lay the groundwork kind of early on in terms of LERs, so land rights, easements, rights of ways, relocation. All of those have to be acquired by the local sponsors, which again, Pontchartrain Levee District and CPRA, before work can begin. And so it's been on in cooperation with Ms. Gorman, district here. I'm happy to say that rights or authorizations for entry for the construction of all the access roads for this project have been issued, been provided to the Corps of Engineers. Anybody who traveled to this venue from the east, if you pass the way station that's just east of the Laplace exit, you'll know is one of the access roads that I'm talking about off of the interstate there. A stockpile site. And for 2 levee reaches have already been issued to the Corps of Engineers so that they can begin work on this project as part of what Mr. Wingate, I believe, will describe to me. Acquisition of land rights for all of the other levee reaches has actually already occurred. Imagine this is no simple task, right? We're trying to coordinate with over 30 private landowners. There are 9 pipeline owners with approximately crossings. We're talking about some major pipelines, as you might imagine, in this River Parish area. 36-inch type pipelines, large pipelines with lots of product flowing through them. Having to relocate those and coordinate with those owners is no insignificant task. Communications and utility owners. There are about a dozen or so of those crossings that we've had to deal with. Much of this property is going to be, much of this project will be constructed on Department of Wildlife and Fisheries property. There's been a lot of coordination with them as well. In addition to the Department of Transportation and Development, as we've talked about safety for, mentioned the access road off the interstate there by the way station and on other access roads that intersect with Louisiana highways, and then the Port of South Louisiana too. So I want to certainly publicly thank Ms. Gorman and the work that the Levee District has done, and our staff as well, for the work that's been done to get us where we are now, so that construction is underway on this important project. Just a few pictures of some of the construction. Again, I think Mark will talk a little bit about this, so run through these very, very quickly, but some test sections for some of the levee reaches. You see some of the early sand placement for some of the levee reaches here as well. Lots of partners associated with this project. The river parishes, of course, St. James, St. Charles, St. John. Mentioned Pontchartrain Levee District already, and the Corps of Engineers, and there are really too many folks working on this project to count, but you can see some of those that are involved there. The last project I want to talk with you about is the flood wall improvements for Section D at the Crawfish Farm. This is a levee reach that is near Golden Meadow. It's part of the LaRose to Golden Meadow levee system. Of course, that was tested as well tremendously as Hurricane Ida passed our coast and performed quite well. So this is an improvement, however, to that system. It's on the east side of Bayou Lafourche, really kind of on the southern end of the protection system there for the LaRose to Golden Meadow. New flood wall here. So this previously the section than what was there previously. It's fall 236-inch pumps run through this new wall. You can see the splash pad on the back, so that if this were ever to be overtopped in the future, there won't be erosion behind the wall. Again, you can see that kind of toward the bottom of the screen there. So again, happy to have this completed. Then this is actually phase 2 improvement of this flood wall feature. The next step will be to increase the elevation of the levee tie-ins that you can see toward the top of the screen and bottom of the screen there. Again, about 18 jobs have been created here. USIS Engineering was involved in this one as well. Company headquartered in Metairie. Sea Level has worked on this as well. They are headquartered in Thibodaux, and GIS, which is headquartered in Galliano, involved in implementing this project. Wendell, of course, a former board member, you all are, is a director at the South Lafourche Levee District. This is a project within that district. And then I'll leave with a couple of quick slides about some upcoming work. So talk an awful lot about oil spill restoration and some of the work that's being funded. Final restoration plan and environmental assessment number 8. Implementation group. There are 4 projects part of that plan. 2 projects were selected for E&D. Those are the New Orleans Land Bridge East from the project beginning of my presentation, and then the Raccoon Island Barrier Restoration Project is also slated for E&D here. Islands is the westernmost island in Bear Island in Terrebonne Parish. Projects selected for construction are the Bayou Dularge Ridge and Marsh Creation Project. That's in Terrebonne Parish, and also the Bayou La Lucha Ridge Restoration and Marsh Creation Project in St. Bernard Parish. On to an awful lot of work that's going on in St. Bernard Parish, including Golden Triangle, Lake Warren, Marsh Creation, and this Bayou La Lucha Ridge and Marsh Creation Project will certainly complement those, and excited to have those underway as well. So another draft. This is the restoration plan in EA 7.1. We'll identify the Home and Navigation Canal Island. It's called Restoration Project. This is a bird island restoration project similar to the, of course, Queen Bess that we've also talked a lot about. But this will be released September 8th. You can see there to discuss this time. And then as another note, the Louisiana trustees will hold their annual meeting at 2:30 on that same day. to participate in. So that concludes my presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions you might have, and thank you, Mr. Chairman and members, for your time.
Yep, thank you, Mr. Haas. Good update. Any questions or comments from the board? Yes, sir, Mr. Bourgeois. Members, the microphones are all off. You just flip
There we go.
flip the switch.
Bren, just looking at this and thinking about some of the issues we've been facing in our projects, a lot of things because of COVID and supply chain issues have fallen behind schedule in some cases. And I don't know how much work this would be, but I look at your construction schedule and even the E&D. I think it might be helpful if we knew or were tracking those projects that were, let's say, behind schedule. Sometimes that's difficult because, you've got 500 and something days to complete a contract. It's hard to determine what your percentage of completion is. But if you do get behind the delivery schedule and what have you, it might be worth noting on both the E&T and the construction if anything is going long, so that's something we can all be paying particular attention to. And I don't know how hard it would be to maybe implement that in your report.
Okay. Yep.
Just thought.
No, it's a good note, and as we entered into COVID, I did sort of report on some of that, and was proud to report that we were able to maintain schedules, at that point in time. That was kind of on the front end of some of the issues that we're seeing, today. So yeah, it would be interesting to see.
It's just that I feel like we're playing catch up on a lot of things. There needs to be a sense of urgency on everything we're doing, and so highlighting the spots where we're behind isn't necessarily throwing darts at anybody, but it is tracking our actual situation.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bourgeois. Any other questions for Mr. Haas? All right. Thank you, Bryn.
Thank you.
All right, members, moving on to agenda item number 7, we're going to get a update on the West Shore Lake Pontchartrain from Mr. Wingate, a good friend from the New Orleans district.
Good morning, Chairman Klein and board members. Certainly my pleasure to present to you an update on the West Shore project. I will tell you, Colonel Murphy sends his regrets. He would. Is this on? Okay. Colonel Murphy, thanks, Jim. Colonel Murphy certainly sends his regrets. He would like to have been here. Please know he is heavily involved in the West Shore project, as well as the Moorpaw consideration as well, that I'll speak to a little bit here this morning. Before I begin, much like Mr. Hawes, certainly want to recognize the efforts that have occurred to this point. What we do is complex. It takes time, it takes money, and it is certainly a team sport. So certainly want to recognize CPRA as our non-federal sponsor on this project. We are not doing this project alone. I see Monica there. Again, we're not doing it alone. It takes all of us to get after these types of projects. But certainly the 3 parishes that we're working closely with, I appreciate them, with St. John, St. James, and St. Charles. Of course, our congressional delegation that makes these projects possible. But let's not forget the industry. Mr. Hawes talked about the pipeline companies and utility owners and our construction contractors that are so vital, as well as even down to the individual landowner that we have to deal with and work with. So we need to all come together to make these projects a ability. And West Shore is not unique. All these projects, these civil works investment projects, are very similar. If we can go to the next slide. So I'm going to be fairly brief. I've learned that at a CPRA board meeting, not to go too long, but certainly here, as long as you all would like to discuss the particular project. So if we can go to the next slide, please. What I'm going to talk, thank you. What I'm going to talk about is really just to give an overview of the project, some of the things we have accomplished to this point. Then I'll quickly jump into the upcoming awards and what does the schedule look like? What are we going to have this year, next year, and so on for the West Shore project? And then I will speak a little bit about mitigation, environmental mitigation to be specific. So Mr. Hawes showed this particular slide. What is this slide really showing us? Well, in the yellow line there, that is the 18.5-mile levee alignment, really for St. Charles and parishes. But it's not just an earthen levee. Okay. Go within that levee system. And within that stations, we have bypass gates where channels actually penetrate that particular levee. We'll have floodgates. We'll have to have borrow So again, it's much more than just an earthen levee. But when the project is complete, as authorized, it will provide a 1% annual exceedance probability. Some would refer to that maybe as the it's more technically accurate. It's the 1% annual exceedance probability. So it is the 100-year level, which does, recognized by FEMA National Flood Insurance Program. What we will build is to the 2027 100-year heights, which is essentially a levee at about 13 foot high near Bonnie Carey. But of course, as we know, the surge kind of tapers off. So as we get closer to the western end, the top elevation or final elevation is around 7.5 feet. Now, all those structures that we're building will be to the year 2070 100-year level of risk reduction. So why do we do that? Because we know that all levees in South Louisiana have to have what we call lifts. They need tender, loving care once you construct them. That's typically done under the operation and maintenance, where we have to go and make further investments to operate. But we don't, or to lift those levees, but we don't want to do that to our structures. So we need to build those structures well out in the future so they're at the right elevation. So again, all our structures will achieve the design heights for the year 27. So sea level rise, subsidence, et cetera, are all in that consideration. The other point that I would make, and you all know this very well, but that particular yellow is actually much of it sitting in open water. You couldn't even drive a truck out to that site. So how do you start building a earthen levee system that's sitting in open water? You'll see some red lines. Those red we were calling access roads. Well, typically, if you think about an access road, well, access is already existing. I'm going to go secure the necessary rights, and I'll just use some, in my opinion, land bridges going through open water too, just so we can gain access and put dump trucks on those red lines to get to the final alignment in yellow. So just a complex environment being constructed in. Now, the West Shore Lake Pontchartrain project is not just the 18.5 mile levee system that I just showed on the previous slide. It also includes investments in St. James Parish. And what you see on this particular graphic here are two yellow ring levees. And those two yellow ring levees were approved and authorized under the feasibility study. They're part of the $760 million investment. That includes the entire West Shore project. Study, it also included a number of improvements to existing culverts in St. James Parish. What you will notice on that particular graphic is I have no representation for the culverts in St. James Parish. And that's not a mistake. That's because working with St. James Parish and working with the sponsors would be a challenge to operate. So what does that mean? Culverts. So we're going to continue to coordinate with St. James Parish as well as CPRA. What alternatives might exist in lieu of culverts going all under Highway 61 that would be invested in addition to those two ring levees? And I'm going to come back to this in a few slides, but we're going to actually flesh that out in a pending study to see what other types of investments can be made in St. James. So where are we in St. James right now? We have completed the engineering surveys for those two ring levees. We have taken the early soil borings. We're wrapping up the final soil borings so that we can really get underway in earnest with the final designs for those two ring levees. But again, whatever future investment might be made in St. James could potentially affect those ring levees and those alignments. So we need to work them in tandem. And I'll come back to that in just a moment. I do want to spend just a moment on accomplishments and upcoming awards. We can sit here and talk about the great news that we received the money in 2018. I've already mentioned I'm going to talk about another study that's coming up, but we have done some significant investment. So we've accomplished a number of contracts to date. Those land bridges, all of those have been awarded, and many of those are near completion, not complete. And if you go through the parishes, in fact, on the way, the big red sign, well, those are all those ramps, those land bridges, if you will, heading out to the alignment, the levee. We've awarded contracts, clay stockpile contracts. We have to borrow and remove and process that material so we can be ready when levy contracts are awarded. We've also sent particular reach, and this is really novel in my opinion, to see how the environment is going to respond when we start putting sand out in that open water environment on that particular slide. Now, that looks impressive, that particular reach, but more importantly, it's the results from that and the monitoring to see how that sand responds when discharged or placing it. Action look like? What will the settlement look like? And that will inform contract awards for levy contracts. We've actually awarded some sand placement contracts, and that's shown on the right-hand side of the bottom slide along the 18.5-mile levee. So as we all sit here today for the 18.5-mile West Shore project is evident. So those levees over the coming years are just going to get bigger and bigger. That means we have greater flood risk along the levee alignment. In addition, of course, in accordance with law, you can't do any of this work. And that is a challenge to perform the environmental to be done. So to date, we've awarded a number of mitigation bank contracts for bottomland hardwoods, but we still need to mitigate for Cypress Tupelo swamp, and I'll talk about that in an upcoming slide. So what does this mean in terms of the construction moving forward? So I've attempted to explain that, a complex situation. What does it look like moving forward on one particular slide? So first of all, let's think about what is the existing elevation along that 18.5-mile levee. Well, it varies, obviously, but approximately what is the elevation? So today, -1. That's what you've got out there is about a -1 is natural ground, and we don't have much flood risk reduction in place as of today. We will have completed all the sand placement work. So by the end of next year, you'll actually have about a 4-foot blanket of sand across all the locations where earthen levees were. That 18.5-mile levee, as I'm appreciating, about 17 of that will be levees. About 1.5 miles constitutes a number of gaps where we have channels that will come into the earthen levee system where we'll ultimately have control. At the end of next year, along about 17 miles of levee, we'll have about a 4-foot sand blanket. As soon as that sand blanket's put down, we'll immediately move to start hauling in clay and start building that up. And why is that so important? Because we're starting to build flood risk reduction in this area. And I'm looking at Mr. Tim and I'm thinking about, boy, what could we take advantage of? And so where you've got these openings where channels are still going to be going through here, we know the of control structures, but that really leads to a concept of your plan as we continue to do work through the years. And that's something that we'll be working with GOSEP as well as CPRA on the possibility. So again, by the end of next year, we're looking at having about a 4-foot earthen blanket across that entire area, starting at -1. So that gets you to about +3. By the end of year 24, our schedule shows that we'll have clay levees built along the entire +6 near the Bonnie Carey area, that's to the east, and into the west, you'll actually be close to final elevations at about a +9. So in my opinion, we will have significant flood reduction in with that earthen levee sitting anywhere from about 6 to 9 by the end of year 2024. So again, great opportunities for the potential of closing off some of those gaps as we still work in those channel areas to build, whether it's pump stations or floodgates or flood walls. By the end of 2025, so what'll happen is once we lay the sand blanket down to about a 4-foot thickness, we'll come back with that clay by the end of 24. But as I've already mentioned, and you all know, we're building in South Louisiana, soft soils, poor soil. So what Mother Nature is going to dictate is that clay levee. And what is it doing during 6 to 9 months? It's consolidating. The existing earth underneath it is getting stronger. So important because as it gets stronger, it allows us to come in with the subsequent lift. So in 2025, we'll come in with the next lift and we'll build those levees, those clay levees, even larger and bigger. And by the end of 2025, and especially on the western end where our soils are stronger, we'll be very close, if not to the final design grade by the end of 2025. But where those soils are weaker on the eastern side, we'll will build out in 2025. That will then go through a very similar hold period. And then we'll come in with the final lift in 26. And then we will have the complete system. But again, significant investment and improvement really starting as early as by the end of 23 and certainly by the end of 24 with the clay levee to about elevation 6 or 9. So very excited about the potential for the flood risk reduction starting here as early as late next year. So we're all tracking this. Unfortunately, Hurricane Ida did hit this particular area. And as a response in the Disaster Recovery and Supplemental Act, it did provide $3 million to perform, I hate to use the word study, but the reality of it is if we had not done a West Shore study, which we partnered with PLD on, I'm looking at Monica, we would not have the $760 million today either. So studies are very, very important because it leads to future investment. So DRSA, the Disaster Recovery Supplemental Act, provided $3 million to do an additional study on top of West Shore to look at things that we're referring to as resiliency. The bottom line, in my opinion, is are there aid to make West Shore even stronger under the $760 million program. So we look forward to signing an agreement here shortly with CPRA to get that study going. And we'll look then for opportunities for further investment in the West Shore project. And that also includes St. James. And that's going to be a great opportunity to potentially pivot possibly more levee. We'll continue to work with St. James Parish as well as CPRA to advance that. We look forward to signing the FCSA later this year on that. But when we're successful, recommendation, that then opens the door to an additional $450 million, which is readily available as a result of the DRSA funding.
Question at this point in time. So on the 450, that $450 million will be handled out of the New Orleans district, or will it be handled out of another core district in and around the country? Because as you and Colonel have repeatedly told Brent and me, that as a result of all of the IIJA funding and the emergency supplemental, that the New Orleans district cannot absorb all of that work in your office. And so you're looking at the Vicksburg district, the St. Paul district on Southwest Coastal, Upper Bear, other authorizations that are receiving funding, NOV. Is that West Shore going to be handled out of your shop?
It is my intent that West Shore would continue to be handled out of the New Orleans district. To me, it only makes sense because we're so involved in the underlying $760 million program. I can't say here with certainty that would happen, but I will also tell you that's not on the table right now. Colonel Murphy and myself had much to do with the workload that's been managed in the upper 5. So we have a say in that. We can shape that. But it would be at this moment, and I think moving forward, it would be prudent that West Shore would remain with the New Orleans district. Good. Certainly for that $450 million future investment.
Good.
Okay. So all the investment that I've shown to this point and the future investment, as I mentioned earlier, requires environmental mitigation, and that is consistent with federal law. In fact, the federal law says that you shall mitigate prior to or concurrent with. The reason I say it's a little bit challenging is based on the information that we have, and we're confident of what we have, is that there are not readily available bank credits for Cypress Tupelo to get after the impacts. That means our other tool is to perform our own mitigation. So we call that a core constructed mitigation project. So essentially we need to go do some construction activity to mitigate for the Cypress Tupelo impacts. A concept that has been under consideration for some time is a concept referred to as the Moore-Paw diversion. And so we've pulled our teams together. Again, that's a big we of a team. CPRA, the Corps, state and federal agencies, and we've looked at Moore-Paw for quite some time. Trust me, Chairman Klein knows it's been quite some time. He has shared that with Colonel Murphy, general officers, as well as myself many times. It's taken quite some time to investigate Moore diversion as a potential concept for mitigation for Cypress Tupelo. Results from a scientific standpoint to mitigate for all the Cypress Tupelo for West Shore Lake Pontchartrain. To that end, it has been recommended as the federal mitigation plan by the Corps to compensate for those unavoidable swamp impacts. That recommendation was laid out to the public. Next statement that closed May of this year. And that went out on public review for about 45 days. So where do we stand right now? We've received all those comments. We're evaluating those comments. And right now, our schedule shows that we will make a decision on the Moorpark diversion no later than November of this year. Now, as I just mentioned, the public review period did close. That comment period did close in May of this year. And we are doing everything we can to accelerate that November decision point. Colonel Murphy is heavily involved. General Holland's very involved. General Graham at the headquarters level is very involved. At the highest level, senior leadership is tracking this. I suspect in part because Chairman Klein has made several visits to Washington, D.C. But those have been very valuable to us to move this concept further, to finally get to a point where we can make a decision if Moorpark is in. Concludes my brief, pending any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Wingate, first for being here. And I know I mess with you on the length of your presentations at times, but that was actually very good. And I'm not being sarcastic when I say that. That was actually very informative, and I appreciate the presentation. I want to begin with just you answered my questions on the additional $450 million for West Shore Lake Pontchartrain, but you also mentioned the placement of clay and sand for levee construction purposes. And there's been a great deal of interest here within the river parishes on how the Corps is going to acquire that material. Can you kind of talk through just a little bit of the process by which the Corps is going to undertake to get the necessary sand, the clay for levee construction purposes?
Sure. Start again with a little context. Typically, when we build Corps civil works projects, the borrow comes from what we call LERDs, lands really called, and those lands are what we call government furnished borrow. Those lands would be provided by the non-federal sponsor, whether it's PLD or CPRA. And so we will still, and we are pursuing that as an option, that the government would provide borrow to the contractor. One of those areas is Bonnie Terry Spillway. That's why we've been removing material and stockpiling it ready for contractors to use. In addition to that, and of course, Chairman Klein's very well aware of this because it's been his leadership that has moved the Corps in this direction. He has looked for some creativity and flexibility from the Corps. Is there any other way to secure borrow? And of course, we've worked very closely not only with CPRA, but Pontchartrain Levee District, and have challenged ourselves. So what we've come up also with is contractor furnished borrow, to where contractors can provide that borrow. It was I think it was earlier this year, maybe a little bit prior to that, we introduced this concept to prospective contractors and borrow pit owners. Would you like to participate? Do you have qualified borrow? Is it engineering acceptable? Is it environmentally acceptable? If you have that, please send in your paperwork and we will identify a list of borrow pits that we believe are approved for construction. So a prospective bidder, when they're going to bid on a levee construction contract, could look to the government furnished pits out of Bonnie Carey, but could also look to that already established list of borrow pits, as well as currently operating commercial pits, because they've already gone through the clearances and they're up and running. So there is a lot of flexibility to the prospective bidders to bring that borrow other than the traditional government furnished pit. In addition to that, if a construction contractor is aware there's a better concept idea, and what do I mean by better? That means better material at a better price. If they know of something that we've missed on the list, or the Bonnie Carey, or an already operating commercial pit, they can bring that to our attention as well. Now, with that said, those pits would have to done all the homework. So that's going to be up to that construction contractor to do that homework and fit into his schedule without negatively impacting our construction schedule, because we've already identified adequate borrow to build this project. Why do we want to do all this? We're trying to get the most competitive bids and get the borrower that's typically going to be very close to the project site to reduce fuel costs. So, Chairman Klein, I hope that answers the question.
It does. And so you mentioned a lot of the clearances, the environmental clearances, the quality of the material, but you also have to have a local permit for some of these pits to be eligible for to provide the material for levee construction, correct?
That is correct. So as part of that package, and of course, we've reviewed all those packages for the pits currently on the list. But if someone else brings another pit that we've not cleared, that is correct. All local permits or any state permits or other permits have to be secured. It's not just the engineering or environmental perspectives of that material.
Okay, thank you. That does answer my question. So if I can move on to Marpaw and the mitigation efforts that you referenced, and there's no secret here amongst board members and members of the audience here that Mississippi reintroduction into Marpaw Swamp has been a cornerstone project of the Coastal Master Plan, but it's also been a priority project as it was authorized decades ago. I'd like to pursue with the Corps of Engineers project because obviously I think it's important that if we have a federally authorized project, risk reduction project, that the Corps of Engineers and the federal government look within the Coastal Master Plan to see if a restoration project could be used to mitigate for the risk reduction project. And so when West Shore Lake Pontchartrain was authorized and funded, we said, look, we believe that Maurepas is a project that would check all of the boxes for mitigation. And so, number one, it's great to have a restoration project included in the master plan being built alongside a federally authorized risk reduction system, but it also provides that cost share benefit as well. And so we received the funding for the Mississippi River reintroduction into Maurepas Swamp from the Restore Council out of Bucket 2 in February of 2020. The tune, I believe, Bren, correct me if I'm wrong here, about $130 million. I've been working with Chairman of the Legislature to secure additional dollars so that we can assure that this does contribute to our overall share. And so, Mr. Wingate, you are correct that there have been a lot of meetings with Colonel Murphy, with General, going up to the highest levels of the Corps of Engineers on the concept and the importance of this project. November, I understand that there are things that we have to. The process that is oftentimes painful. And so I would just encourage you, I'm going to use Mr. Bourgeois' comments, sense of urgency, please, in getting us to that formal yes. And so my question to you, Mr. Wingate, and you briefly mentioned this in your comments, are there any other mitigation options that the Corps of Engineers is looking at that are, and forgive the term here, as baked as Maurepas currently is?
Well, as I mentioned, there's really two tools from my perspective, and what we've learned through the HISDRs and other civil works projects. We can go to mitigation banks, or we can do core constructive mitigation. And this is Cypress Tupelo. And as I've often said, I do love a mitigation bank because I can get in and out, and we can be complete. But in this particular case, we just don't have readily available credits. There are some credits for Cypress Tupelo out there, but it's very small, very limited. It's just, there's not the option out there. I'm not suggesting that mitigation banks won't be out there in the future. They probably will be, but today they're not readily available. So that really leads us to core constructive mitigation. To my appreciation, this is the most advanced core constructed mitigation project that we have. And there's some positives about it. And I don't know what the decision will be. That is not my decision to make. That decision will be made at a higher level. And, you know, we do appreciate the sense of urgency. And I will tell you, Colonel Murphy, General Holland, and myself, we're very well aware of it. We're pushing hard to get this decision as soon as we can. But there's a couple things going for us that we've learned on HISDRs. One of the toughest things with environmental mitigation is securing the land and getting the land rights. Much of this land is on state-owned land. So from my perspective, this is a It's a beautiful investment from that perspective. The other piece is the science shows it's offsetting the impact. So Chairman Klein, in short, as far as when it comes to core constructive mitigation, I would support that this is certainly the most advanced core constructive mitigation plan we have for West Shore.
So I appreciate your comments on the mitigation credits not being readily available. So that's one piece. If Maurepas is not the selected mitigation, you're still years off from developing a mitigation plan for West Shore Lake Pontchartrain, correct?
That
If
is
you can't go to a bank and you can't use Maurepas,
That is correct. And what experience would show, you're correct. We're talking 2 to 3 years, and that's not even getting into the land rights issues. I'm looking at Mr. Bourgeois. We know that we had challenges on the hyzers on the West Bank for that very matter. Again, here this appears that we've got all the land right issues worked out. The designs are, or the analysis, the science shows that this can work. So no, it would be years, in my opinion, to pivot to some other core constructive mitigation feature.
and as you just noted, the EIS that is out, or that you are review, or the division is currently reviewing public comments, it is the recommendation for mitigation at this point in time.
That is the recommendation, and that is what was disclosed to the public.
All right, I know Ms. Gorman is going to want to jump in here sooner or later, so I'm going to turn it over to Monica.
Is this on? Yep. Yeah. All right. Thanks very much. Mark, I really appreciate you sharing the timeline. I know that the timeline for this project has been very sensitive, but today I think what you've shown is what a lot of people have been asking about for quite some time. But I do want to remind people, when I talk about this project, I reference 3 C's. I reference the cost, I reference the challenges, and I reference the commitments. A lot of times they all go hand in hand. I never thought in my 18 years here at PLD that, we would see this project. I think it's an amazing feat that after 50 years of studying this piece report, but I have to remind people all the time, it was not a shovel-ready project. So when we received those funds out of the BBA 18, we had to actually finish the project. Let's go place it on the ground. Let's just, get that footprint correct. And then you had to work with the real estate and pipelines, which we're still working on. I mean, so many things in the last couple of years have gone on, not to mention COVID. 2020, 2020, we pretty much shut everything down. 2021, it kind of rolled into the same thing again. So there have been tremendous amounts of challenges with the partnerships that we have. And I mean the partnerships with our state delegation, our congressional delegation, with the core, the non-federal, us as non-federal sponsors, but even with, our local parishes. And everyone has been so committed to this. The cost in itself, I mean, $760 million. I mean, you when you called that day, you said, I hope you're sitting down because you're not going to believe this. I'll never forget that day. But the commitment from the state for the cost of this project, when they decided to take on the 35% cost share, that was tremendous to the parents. Because I think a lot of people forget the costs that are associated with a payback, a 35% payback. And the state stepped up and said, look, we understand what these river parishes have been through. We're willing, we're willing to step up, and they did. So it's the cost, the commitment again, and a challenge to the parishes themselves, whether they realize it or not, unbeknownst to them, they passed their own millages, St. Charles and St. John in particular, millages, so that shows not only they passed these millages, I believe, around 2016, 17 timeframe, to their commitment to the flood risk reduction in their parishes. Little did they know they would receive these funds. So again, the challenges upcoming are, knock on wood, any potential storms, but look, something is better than nothing after last year, in my opinion. This area did a phenomenal job in how they responded and what the people have done. But I would there will be other challenges as the project moves forward. the residents are going to be inconvenienced. You're going to see trucks on the highway. You're going to see lots more traffic. You're going to see a lot going on. But I'd like to thank this opportunity or take this opportunity to thank the residents in these parishes, because it's your continued commitment to where you live, where you're proud to live, where you're proud to call home. And you've got the commitment from the state, you've got the commitment from the non-federal sponsors, as well as within your own parish, that we're going to keep this going. So just remember those 3 C's: that cost, the challenges, and the commitment. They all go hand in hand. But to the residents, I really appreciate what you've done and stepped up. Again, for the millages that are passed for the next 30 years, and you're home.
For those comments. Do we have any other questions for Mr. Wingate? Yes, sir. Chairman Zarang.
Morning, Mark. Question on the Hisdris project. Has all the mitigation been completed from Hisdris?
It has been completed. There's still work to do on it because when you do a core constructive mitigation project, you need to do the surveillance and make sure it's all performing and hitting success criteria. But all mitigation, both East Bank and West Bank, has been completed.
Okay. On projects that are underway or at least partially completed, is there any consideration for unintended beneficial consequences, such as environmental benefits that are achieved through some of the protection measures as applying to credit or could be applied to credit? I'm speaking Morganza and those type things.
Yeah, that's what's coming to my mind is the Morganza project. You know, we're going to continue to stay in conversations on the Morganza project about those possibilities. I would tell you, Chairman Zarang, that's not on paper right now. I think that's a topic that needs to continue to be pushed. I know Dwayne's pushing that hard. Reggie Dupree's pushing the concept hard. In fact, we'll have OMB visiting Morganza the Gulf here later this month on that. So I think it's a worthy topic, but I don't think we are there yet to take credit for that piece. And that's why I mentioned it's mitigation banks or core constructed. But some of these projects also produce some benefits. And when it's clear they're producing benefits, we can offset the impacts, but I don't think it's as robust as maybe where we would potentially like to consider getting to.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Z, any other questions, comments, Mr. Bourgeois?
Yeah, thanks, Mark. And I think when it comes to mitigation, there's probably some other alternatives that we might could look at. I've got a project that I'm getting to work on. I'm relocating a levee. So the old area outside the levee is going to become a dead area. Easy for me to convert it to a wetland, right? But what's the incentive for me? It's too small of an area to create a bank. It's not going to be used as a self-mitigation on this particular project. I can maybe use it for another project. But it seems like there's got to be a little bit more flexibility in our ability to create wetlands and get credit for it, both within the system, protected by the system, as he said. But the main thing I wanted to mention too is that, and don't get me wrong, we you know, with projects like West Shore and Morganza, we get nowhere without the core. Not nowhere, but we don't get them without the core, right? But and even as far as some things that seem like some no-brainers to most of us looking out, like Maripar is a perfect mitigation for this. And to say we're gonna have a final decision after all of these years in November, and that's just a couple of months away, and it'll be here in no time. But what we're seeing, and I'm seeing on Morganza, I listened to a lot of the project design team discussions that, you know, are weekly happening. I listen to them as long as I can because I get aggravated by a lot of the things that seem to be like, we know we're trying to do things in a very aggressive way. We, as the local partners, have that Gulf of Mexico gun to our head. But it seems like, and I'm not saying this isn't true of the project management, you know, in our case, Lacey is doing, I think, an excellent job trying to get everything done. But the Corps seems to still be acting without, and I'm going to say our words again, the sense of urgency on some of this. It's no big deal for someone in one of the offices there to say, oh, okay, we're going to have to look in that. That's going to be a couple of months. We can't keep having those couple of months. They turn into years, and that's a problem. So I'm just asking you to, I'm sure it's going to get there with West Shore. It's going to be the same thing. It has been the same with the Marpar diversion, is to see if there's any way to have some broader conversations with, the good people who work with the Corps, for the Corps, on, how can we look at some of these things a little bit differently and move a little further faster, because of the sense of urgency.
I appreciate that question / comment. And I think what you're really talking about is it comes down to leadership. And I'm not going to get into great details, but I will tell you, and Chairman Klein knows this, General Graham at the highest level at headquarters, he is really instilling that. We need to make decisions and we need to move on. Okay, but that doesn't happen overnight. But I think ultimately, it doesn't matter what organization you work in, you're always going to have folks that challenge, and that's okay. Let's challenge, but let's make sure that we understand the sense of urgency, but let's get it right. But that doesn't mean it has to take an inordinate amount of time to do that. But that's where it comes to the leadership. And so we've got to drive those decisions, drive it to the correct decision. And I will tell you, with inside the Corps, and it's not going to happen overnight, and we'll always have those issues. But I do think as a large organization, we are seeing those changes. And again, it's beginning with General Spellman as the chief, General Graham on the civil works side are driving those changes.
And I agree. I see that basically from Major General Spellman and Graham. I see it at headquarters, division, district, your level, colonel's level, and project management. We just got to get into the rank and file. The people who are there all the time, who do a good job, they're not doing anything out of the norm that they would do. So they're not doing anything wrong. They're just not doing it more right. So I appreciate that. Okay. Thank you.
Well said, Mr. Bourgeois. All right. Any other questions or comments for Mark? I will say, Mark, we're gonna end this on a positive note. And Dwayne just got finished talking about Morganza. Obviously, this agenda item is on West Shore, but just the overall level of involvement from Corps leadership at the highest levels on these two projects, West Shore and Morganza, and we can even throw in Marpar there as well. The fact that Major General Spellman will take a meeting with Brent Haas and me is refreshing. As you mentioned, Brent and I had the opportunity to meet with Major General Graham on Marpar, and I think the result of that meeting speaks for itself. Is that he directly and personally got involved in the issue that we raised. And so it's just, I really do appreciate the level of communication, partnership, and collaboration at all levels, not just at the district, because it's certainly there at the district, but through the division and headquarters levels as well. So if you could relay that on behalf of the board, that would be, I'd appreciate it. Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Mark, for being here today. All right. We're going to get an update from Mr. Banks. Where's Patrick? There he is, on some of the work that Wildlife and Fisheries is doing, some of which is in conjunction with CPRA on the Strategic Oyster Plan.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Chairman Klein, and members of the board, for allowing us to give you all an update. I apologize for my title slide. I forgot a critical word there. These updates here, these are updates on the strategic plan for oysters. So apologies there. So we'll go ahead and get started. Just to give a little background on the oyster strategic plan, this draft was developed by the agency with other state agencies as well as industry, and it's submitted to the legislators on December. The overall goals are to increase oyster density, resilience, and increase resilience in the oyster industry itself, at an estimated cost of $132 million. Although we deal in and CPRA often deals in billions, costs are rising no matter what level you're talking about. And so we're finding that some of our early estimates are likely quite low compared to what it looks like it's going to cost us in the end. Within the strategic plan, we identified 12 initiatives to help us reach those goals and to achieve the objectives. Those initiatives are number one, traditional culch planting, which is a technique that we've used since 1917 within the agency, where we go out and provide habitat for larval oysters to attach to. So we're quite adept at doing those kinds of projects. So that was a fairly easy initiative for us to start. We also are starting to of planting culch with baby oysters already attached. That's going through hatchery means, hatcheries and nurseries and things like that. That was another initiative that we're working on. We're also getting in small reefs dotted along the coast in strategic areas that would be protected from harvest, protected from perturbations, or at least man-made perturbations, so that we can always have a stock of spawning oysters dotted throughout the coast, so that they can provide those larval recruits to our other reefs. We also feel like an initiative of expanding alternative oyster aquaculture, basically off-bottom growing of oysters in Louisiana, would be something that would be very helpful to the oyster industry in terms of having an option for resilience. We don't believe that it's going to replace the on-bottom industry, certainly, but it can give the industry another option to try to adapt to changing environments. We're also working closely with CPRA on expansion of hydrologic monitoring. One of the difficulties through the years when I worked directly with oysters was understanding some of the hydrologic conditions, especially east of the river. You are familiar with the areas east of the river, the Black Bay, up into near the MRGO and north into St. Bernard Parish. Collection platforms that occurred in the Plaquemines side east of the river that helped us monitor environmental conditions. But once you got above that Mississippi River Gulf outlet and into St. Bernard Parish, there was only a platform up in that area. And some of this hydrologic monitoring, installing some additional data collection platforms in that area will be very, very helpful to us and the industry managing their resources on their projects. And then we have several others: evaluations of leases incapable of oyster production, requirements, establishment of new public oyster areas, evaluation of the Mississippi River Gulf outlet hydrologic conditions, as well as evaluation of restoration of the Bohemia spillway, and then research and development. I've underlined 7 of these 12 because it is those 7 that we have been able to actually make some progress on thus far. Those other 5, we're still get those started. So I'll start culch planting. We've completed several culch plants in the past couple of years. This is an outline of Sister Lake, which is a public oyster seed reservation in Terrebonne Parish, and we placed 200 acres worth of culch material in that area. And we've been monitoring that site, and we've got a very population of oysters growing on that site, thankfully. So that's been very successful, and we've been proud of that. We've also moved east of the river into St. Bernard Parish to Bay, and we've just recently finished placing about 200 acres in that area. And those are in 2 different spots within the bay, each 100 acres apiece. And so we'll that area next month. In conjunction with some of the culch planting, we're also planting preset culch that has oysters on it. So we call that hatchery spat on shell, or you may hear it as spat on culch, spat being a baby oyster. So we take culch material, place it into the hatchery, add larvae, And once those larvae settle on that culture material and start to grow, then we take that out and we place that directly on reefs. So it's sort of a jump start to Mother Nature. There's some areas of our coast where we're seeing the oysters are alive, but they're not reproducing very well, and we're not getting a fresh recruitment of young oysters. And these are meant to supplement that situation. And there's just some more pictures of that, the result. You can see the baby oysters growing on some of those shells, especially in the picture in the middle. Moving on to number 3, and this dovetails in with initiative number 2. We're working on a spawning stock network of reefs throughout the coast, and I apologize for this screen only showing one map, and it's hard to tell where this is. This is actually a reef we built off of Mozambique Point, which is just right on the St. Bernard and Plaquemines Parish border to the river. I actually had several maps to show you, but unfortunately, in the PDF version, I'm not able to cycle through those, so I apologize. But we've been able to construct these small 1 to 5 acre reefs in various places throughout the coast, and we're using that hatchery spat-on shell as a jump start and placing it on top of these constructed reefs. And that's going to give us what we call a spawning stock network of reefs throughout the coast, much in an area where you can protect that from harvest, protect that from impacts as best you can, and so that you always have a reproducing stock of oysters in different areas. It also gives us a very good way to monitor resources and impacts from or different storms, because you may see impacts in one particular environment, but not the other, and you can really learn a lot from having this network all around the state.
Patrick, can I ask a question really quickly?
Sure.
When you are going to be protecting these reefs, what kind of protection and enforcement do you have associated with that?
It's a very good question, Karen. So we take these reefs and we place them into our artificial reef program, which actually protects them from any kind of commercial activity. We don't, however, protect them from any kind of recreational fishing activity around it, because certainly that's not a direct impact on the reef itself. And so we see that as a passive use of that habitat. And so once we place these reefs into the artificial reef program, we ask our commission to actually designate them as off limits to commercial activity through regulation. And so once that occurs, we have a rule in place, then our enforcement can make sure that they enforce nobody going in there and actually harvesting oysters or impacting it in any way.
Thank you.
Going on to initiative 4 that we've been able to start, and I won't get too far into this, but I mentioned earlier that we would like to provide a little bit more help to the new alternative oyster culture industry in Louisiana. This is the off-bottom cage culture of oysters. And so one of the difficulties that industry has had in expanding is just the lack of capital and the lack of help, the lack of seed availability, small oyster availability to put into their cages and into their farms. And so by investing in that hatchery technology and expanding industry, another option to move to on bottom lease areas are no longer viable. And so we've been able, using some funds from CPRA, we've been able to hire or contact, and they're operating this program for us, where they provide these to people in the alternative oyster culture industry. And so they've put out several grant from folks. They've gotten in a lot of applications. They've a number of farming grants, as well as a couple of nursery grants, as well as one hatchery grant. And so that project is moving along nicely, and we're real here pretty soon.
Can you talk a little bit about, Patrick, about just the overall response from industry as it relates to the alternative harvesting technique?
It's been fairly lukewarm, I would say. The traditional industry does not necessarily embrace this opportunity. They're traditional oystermen that want to farm on bottom, and they have their existing leases. But a few of them have taken the leap and gotten into this and done it very successfully. We have found that the vast majority of these applicants that we've seen, though, are coming from the non-traditional areas. And so you're seeing actually some new people getting into the industry that were never in the traditional oyster industry, didn't have a family heritage in the traditional oyster industry. But thankfully, we are seeing some of those traditional families get into this off bottom. But I'd say it's been a lukewarm reception to the traditional oyster industry, but the overall reception has been good.
Chip,
Yes, sir. Go ahead.
is the allocation of funds affected or the investment in those things by interest? And the reason I'm asking is because obviously after previous storms, the oil spill, other things, we've invested in coach, putting material. We know what we pretty much get for that. But these alternatives, I mean, you look at what's going on in the East Coast and West Coast, and predominantly that's all they do.
Yeah.
Investing and encouraging things, although they may not like it traditionally, I mean, it does seem in terms of opportunity, predictability, and other investment opportunities, a sound approach. And just wondering, is the fact that there may not be interest affecting in any way the investment, a proportion of investment of that 130 something million? Because if I think if you invest more, I think there would more people would probably engage in that.
Well, that's a valid point, Representative Zarang. I don't know that I have an answer to you, but we certainly could add investments to that program or add money towards that program and see if the interest spikes, I guess you would say. I just don't know that I would have a good idea as to know whether they would be more interested in if we had more money available. But it's certainly a possibility.
And the other question to that, I know there was some legislation required to allow for the forming off-bottom culture in certain areas and making some types of securing habitat, or at least from the legal perspective, how it can be accomplished. Is there any additional legislation that is required or would be required or could be implemented to enhance that as well? I mean, are there restrictions right now that may be limiting its interest or ability to expand off-bottom culture and other things?
I don't think so at this time. You all have done the work that was necessary to allow this activity to occur. Y'all have taken the steps on several occasions to expand those opportunities. For example, we used to only allow through rule or through law alternative oyster culture on state-owned leased bottoms. You all changed the law, thankfully, and expanded that to privately owned bottoms. That was a huge help, and we saw some more folks get into the industry, including a very large family who's a traditional oyster family get into the industry in that case. You all have also passed legislation putting together aquaculture parks in 2 different places along the coast now. One was in Grand Isle a number of years ago, and you all built on that idea by establishing one over in the Cameron area this year. So I think the legislation is where it needs to be at this point. We have a lot of opportunity out for folks to get into this business. Whether we have enough funding opportunity, I'm not sure. But I think legislatively, you all have done the work that was needed to try to allow this activity to occur.
Okay. Thank you, Patrick. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
One more question, Patrick. I remember in some conversations with some members of the industry when the off-bottom culture was becoming established, the western part of the state, there were at that time a lot of concerns about poaching and how you could enforce. I wonder if the department has developed a strategy about policing these new off-bottom areas.
Yeah, unfortunately, that's a problem also in the traditional community as well. One way that we think that these aquaculture parks can be better enforced is to situate them fairly close to population centers. I think that's why the Grand Isle Aquaculture Park works well. It's within eyeshot of our marine lab facility on Grand Isle. The hope is in Calcasieu. It's not quite as close to population centers, but it's closer than a lot of other places in the state. And so it's going to be always is going to be an enforcement issue. I don't know how to get around that, but there are some things partnering with the local Port Commission is helpful because they also have some enforcement authority in that situation. That's served us well in Grand Isle, and I hope it's going to serve us well in Cameron as well. But in terms of a strategy, I think the strategy from our enforcement section is they will monitor it just as well as they can monitor traditional on-bottom leases. So.
Thank you.
So moving on, Initiative 5 was called the Private Oyster Lease Rehabilitation Program to private leaseholders for rehabilitation work. The majority of that kind of work, shells down or limestone and concrete, kicking off right now. Something that CPRA has been very helpful on, and they're actually taking the lead on for us, is expansion of this hydrologic monitoring. They are in the process, and thankfully they discussed a lot of this with us ahead of time. They're in the process of 3 new sites constructed east of the Mississippi River up in that St. Bernard Parish area. And some of those sites coincide with the Drum Bay Culch plant, for instance, an area just south of there, but north of the Mississippi River Gulf outlet called Bay Elwha, which is an area that we are planning to open up for on-bottom leasing at some point. And so thanks to CPRA, that portion of the strategic plan is moving forward as well, with 3 new sites coming soon. And then lastly, on our Initiative 12, the research and development is largely centered around a very large project that we have with the University of Louisiana at Lafayette. And although it's the contract, it also involves researchers from LSU as well as University of Maryland. And that's researching oysters and breed for genetic traits to low salinity periods. Now, some people have mentioned the word of freshwater oyster. That is absolutely inaccurate. That's not what we're trying to do. That's not going to be possible. But if you can select animals that satisfy freshwater events over and over and breed those animals, you can slowly breed these genes into the oyster population that help them withstand longer periods of lower salinity, which would kill normal oysters. And so they're working very, very hard on this. As many of you may know, genetic work and genetic research and breeding programs take many, many, many years to develop. We have chosen to push a lot of funds towards this project to increase the effort by the researchers to try to get this accomplished in 5 years. I'm not exactly sure we're going to be able to get it done that quickly, but that's the whole purpose of putting such a huge financial in this effort, because if they can provide that line of longer periods of freshwater inundation, we may not have the devastating impacts of a Bonnet Carré spillway opening and things like that we've had in the past. We've got some oysters in the water already from some of those breeding programs going on for about 1.5 years, but we're very happy with the progress that the research community has made. And so we're looking forward to that. Project is called Low Spat, and I'd encourage you to go to the website and see a little bit more about what they're doing. And I won't spend too much time on the financials, but I just wanted to give you guys an idea of how much we expected a lot of this to cost, how much money we spent on these projects to date, and what's left. What is spent and what is budgeted doesn't necessarily mean, what is budgeted does not mean that we have that money available to us. First put this together a couple of years ago, we felt that's what it was going to cost. We've had, thankfully, commitments or funds from CPRA, from NERDA funds, from our own internal funds, and we've been able to spend, or at least in progress of spending, about $27 million worth of this plan, largely driven by our traditional culture and the alternative oyster culture. And within the plan, if you go back and look at the plan, within the goals, there were several objectives, several measurable objectives. And so I always want to try to give an update on where we are on these measurable objectives. One of the measurable objectives was to achieve an average density of 20 seed size oysters per square meter on these on these projects. And we've achieved that on the recent Sister Lake Culch plant. We're in the process of evaluating that on some of these broodstock sanctuary reefs that we're building. So we're meeting, or at least we're starting to meet those objectives. We said we would enhance at least 1,000 acres of existing reef habitat. We've already constructed 400 acres of that, so we're well on our way there to meeting that measurable objective. We're maintaining at least 40 acres of these areas, and we've constructed 8.8 acres to date already. So we're well on our way there. So we've got a lot of progress contractors have done towards that. And with that, I'll answer any. Well, I'm sorry, I've got a summary slide, but I think I just gave you a summary. So I'll answer any questions you may have.
So Patrick, a lot of the funding that you talked about that is coming from CPRA, that's additional funding separate and apart from the funding that would be for oyster mitigation related to mid-Barrett, correct? And so can just, so the members, when you approve the annual plan, these funds are outlined in the annual plan. So it's, there's $15 million of Go Mesa that has been committed for this. There's currently a contract that we have with Wildlife and Fisheries for $10 million. I believe y'all are approaching about the $3 million mark for what's been expended to date. And so could you give us a little bit of an update, just so the board an update on the status or the kind of the path forward on the remainder of those funds? And then as you all need that additional 5 that we've got committed, that is outlined in the annual plan. We'd stand ready to enter into that agreement as well.
Sure. And I'll start by thanking CPRA and you, Chairman Klein, for committing that to this work. It's been really besides the natural resource damage assessment monies that we've received for oysters, this has been the bulk of the work we've been able to do, is because of that initial $10 million contract and that $15 million commitment. So thank you. We've used those funds. The entirety of the alternative oyster culture contract with LSU or with Sea Grant is funded through your contract. So we're more of a pass through there. We are using some of those funds, and I didn't get into this very much, but we are using some of those to jumpstart and start the private oyster lease rehabilitation program, which the plans are, at least at this point, to provide $1 million worth of spat on culch to oyster leaseholders. So that's coming up. We're in the process of putting some bid packages together to put out for bid for a contractor to do that. And then the rest of that was largely our spat on shell efforts on this broodstock sanctuary network. So that's where we are. Those are the 3 main parts of the contract we have with you all. And we're well on our way. We have a little bit more left to do with spat on shell. And of course, the alternative oyster culture contract, while it's a $3 million contract with Sea Grant, I don't think they've expended but about $1 million thus far. So we still have about $2 million of your $10 million contract that is yet to go to that.
Okay, very helpful. Thank you. Any questions for Patrick?
I do.
Yes, sir. Go ahead, Zeke.
Patrick, and appreciate the effort that's going into this, but as y'all are working toward this and improving oyster production, which is everybody's goal, have y'all considered harvesting practices as well? And I know you and I, way back, we tried to introduce some legislation, and I still bear scars from that, but looking at trying to increase, or looking at making them more productive by how we harvest them and managing the resources well. Is that part of this?
Representative Zerang, no, it's not specifically spelled out in the strategic plan, but I will say that that's part of our management program already. We are always looking at harvest activities, how much is harvested, the methods in which are harvested, and we make recommendations to either the commission or the legislature for harvest changes. One example is the amount of shell that is removed from the reef along with harvest. For years and years and years, there was no restriction on the amount of shell that could be removed when an oyster boat or a vessel came in and harvested seed oysters for transplant to their leases. through the efforts of the commission over the last several years, we've instituted a 15% maximum removal threshold, and that's greatly helped the status of the reefs on the public grounds, maintain the shell. What we were finding is a lot of the shell from the existing reefs on our public grounds were just simply being removed and transplanted along with the live oysters to the private leases. We're fine with them taking the live oysters and transplanting to the leases. That's one of the purposes of the public grounds. But taking the reef material in our base for our reefs was not something. So those are the types of activities that we do, all the time to try to address any kind of habitat impacts from the actual harvesting activities.
And I appreciate that. I know now's not the day to discuss that, but I would like to talk to you more
Sure.
about how we can. Thank you.
Thank you, Z. Any other questions for Patrick? Okay, let's go, Trevor. One more bite at that.
One more. That's it, though. Can you tell me, Patrick, where we are in the moratorium? It's a reference when we fully lift it.
Yeah. Ooh, that's been a tough nut for us to crack. We've been at it for several years now. We are still, unfortunately, in phase 0, but thankfully at the very tail end of the phase 0, and we're trying to prepare for the next 2 phases actually. And part of that is developing dual claim lease agreements with private landowners or private land claimants. So there's a lot of cases where the state and a private entity claim the same water bottom. And we're trying to negotiate an agreement between the state and that landowner as to how we will jointly lease that water bottom to the oyster industry, which is what the legislature directed us to do. And so that seems to be taking a little bit longer than we had hoped, but that's where we are. I would not even want to venture a guess as to when we would fully lift the moratorium. I thought we would be there by now, but some of these phases are just taking a little bit longer than I thought.
Good questions, comments. Always appreciate the active engagement of board members on these agenda items. So looks like Patrick has already exited the building.
No, he's still there.
But thanks, Patrick. Great update. And so members, let's move on. We got 3 to go. We're going to get an update from Ms. Krista Jankowski on the 2023 Master Plan Public Outreach.
All right. Can everyone hear me? All right, great. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, members of the board. The rest of my team is back in Baton Rouge, still, diligently working on getting our model results out and really analyzing the results of the development and update of the 2023 master plan. So I'm going to focus on a pretty targeted update, and that is on our upcoming plans for outreach and engagement efforts in support of the 2023 plan. And with respect to the full agenda, I'll try and be real brief. Master plan has been under development since essentially since the 2017 master plan was approved, and we've been working very hard, as many of the members of the board know, and we are looking forward this fall and this winter to really stepping out in front of the public and communicating the master plan and really about the challenges that we will face and the opportunities we have to address those challenges, and to really talk about the benefits of restoration and protection projects that we 2023 master plan update. In support of that, we have planned a three-part series of meetings this fall and winter. And what we're really looking to do is to make sure that we can sort of set the stage and kind of bring everyone back to the table and say, let's look at the 2023 master plan. Let's all try to reset and recalibrate and understand what are the challenges, what are the issues that we're trying to address, what are the options we have to address those, and how can we move of really building a for several months now. Members of the board and members of the audience who are part of different advisory groups that we hold will be familiar with some of the information I'm presenting today. So members of our advisory groups, our coastal advisory team, members of the community engagement work group that we have established for the 2023 master plan process, as well as members of nonprofit organizations and other partners that we've been working with, have really had a hand in also working to sort of set up and start the planning process for these meetings. So we're really excited to not just have it coming from our team, but from a coalition of folks working together to really think about what we want to be saying and how we want to be saying it to folks out across the coast. And we're really trying to plan these meetings to anticipate engaging with a wider variety of plan, is not only to communicate and have those ongoing conversations with traditionally engaged stakeholders, but also open the door to conversations with folks. So, these outreach meetings are an opportunity to engage with those folks, as well as, legislators and other elected officials, members of the board, and over the years to push for this date of the master plan. And we really also are looking at this planned series of meetings as an opportunity to not only present what we've been working on, but also to hear great feedback along the ways to make sure that when we are presenting a draft plan, and we're doing so not just from CPRA, but with the voices of the public, and that as well. So these slides are just going to walk us through sort of time-wise, the series of meetings. The first ones we're aiming for September. I don't have exact dates, times, and locations for those meetings today, but as soon as we have them, we'll share those with the board, absolutely. But we are planning 3 in-person meetings and 1 virtual meeting to ensure that folks who can't maybe get out in person are able to participate and get the same information. And currently we've identified 3 locations for those meetings: New Orleans, Homa, and Lake Charles. The goal of those meetings is, like I said, to sort of provide context and information about the master plan, about the master plan process, the coastal challenges, opportunities we have, and to provide familiarity and context for conversations that are going to be happening as we're moving towards the release of that draft plan and the final master plan in 2023. It'll also be an opportunity to report out on ongoing and current projects, right? Master plan is a big thing, but we also have other things that are going on. And so we want to make sure that people are aware of those and understand that it's not just every 6 years that CPRA does something, right? We heard about that in presentations earlier today, right? There's a lot going on. So we want to make sure we're keeping people informed about those as well. And then those September meetings will allow us to set the stage for subsequent meetings and really provide information and dates and times for people on upcoming milestones and future meetings. Then, as I mentioned, we want to take any feedback that we get from those meetings, incorporate it into our process, and then set up for a wider swath of meetings in around the November timeframe. And so we're looking at about 8 meetings that could expand to a few more. And we don't have locations, communities identified specifically for those. We're in the planning stages, like I said, with some of our partners to make sure we have those finalized. But the goal of those is to expand our reach beyond New Orleans, Homa, and Lake Charles, and really make sure that we're talking to folks coast-wide and having those conversations in a number of communities in that November timeframe. We are also looking to expand our reach, not only just hosting those meetings, but partnering with local community organizations to make sure that there is buy-in and participation from nonprofits and folks who are working on the ground on coastal issues or other issues in these communities, and really host those meetings in partnership. And we're hoping that will also, like I said, bring in additional folks who haven't participated in this process in the past and maybe are getting energized with the update of the 2023 plan and want to be involved, and having somebody that they know, a local community member, a local organization, there might be their entry point into coming into the conversation. So that's the goal of that. These are probably going to be pretty similar to those community conversations that happened in 2017 process leading up to 2017 master plan, for those of you who are familiar. So a bit more conversational, gather around the table, let's look at maps, let's talk about candidate projects, those types of activities happening at those meetings, alongside, some presentation. And it will also be an opportunity, really the first large opportunity for individuals and communities to preview the update to the 2023 master plan data viewer. So we've been working behind the scenes. As I said, members of the Coastal Advisory Team and others may be familiar and have seen some previews of the kind of new style and look and utility of that master plan data viewer, but we really want to have those available for people to look at a map, be able to click on projects, find out information about those candidate projects, see model output data at that point, and kind of have conversations in an interactive way. So they'll be able to also walk away from those meetings and pull up that website and explore it on their own again, and maybe share that with a friend or a family member, and kind of expand the reach of these meetings that way as well. And then from those meetings, again, we want to incorporate feedback heading into the public hearings that are necessary ahead of the draft plan and the final plan, looking at the January timeframe. And so in those hearings, we would have the full presentation of the draft plan ahead of any submissions to the CPRA board in March next year. April, and there'd be opportunities for public comment and feedback in that official process that happens around that time frame, leading into and times, dates, locations. We'll share all that information just as soon as it's finalized. For the September, that's going to be really soon because September is right around the corner, as we all know. Finally, just wanted to report out again the other outreach activities and things that are happening outside of this series of meetings. So our team is posting technical reports and presentations on the CPRA website under the 2023 Master Plan header under a technical resources page. Those are available for folks to access at any time. We're outreach and engagement team on social media posts and putting out email blasts to make sure people are informed on those formats, and then also attending conferences, tabling at coastal events a couple of years, as we're all aware. And so if there are questions on any of this, I just wanted to make sure we have that masterplan@la.gov email address up on the screen. But as I mentioned, pretty targeted update, but I wanted to let y'all know about our plans for this series of meetings. And if there are questions, I would be happy to.
How do you see it changing from the 17 master plan to the 23? Because times have changed. And I'll tell you, I learned this morning about the cooperative work being done between CPRA and Wildlife and Fisheries. I mean, so CPRA has evolved over the last 6 years. So how do you see that being reflected in the new annual plan?
So within the master plan, there are a couple of points in which we can point those out. And so we've been working for the past couple of years with some contractors on actually laying out the master plan document. So I've got a document that needs a bunch of text added to it, but we have space within that master plan document itself to highlight ongoing programs and partnerships. We also have a section that I've already worked with Charles Sutcliffe with the Governor's Office of Coastal Affairs on highlighting things like the Adaptive Governance Initiative and programs that are sort of adjacent and in partnership with CPRA and the work that we're doing. So we have a lot of space available in that master plan document. And then we intend to, with these types of meetings, to make sure that we're reporting out not just on CPRA and master plan's role, but on those ongoing partnerships like the Watershed Initiative or other options or opportunities that CPRA has to work with different groups across the coast.
I think well said, Krista, but you're exactly correct, Ms. Goodson, that I think CPRA has evolved over the last 4 to 5 years. Is that CPRA is now leading a climate initiatives task force through the governor's office. We're involved in the watershed. We're working in conjunction with Wildlife and Fisheries. We now have a chief resilience officer for coastal Louisiana. And so the master plan, it's important for everybody to really remember that it's not just a list of projects, but it also tells the story of the coast, but it also tells of how we are structured as an agency, how we function as a state government. And so I believe that all of those things that Krista just talked about will be having their own individual space within the master plan. If that answers your.
Yeah.
Maybe not.
Well, no. Well, it does. I just want to make sure because I think sometimes we overlook the cooperative work that agencies do, and I wanted to make sure that we promote it to other branches of government. and to the public in general. And I just think you're not getting enough kudos for, taking care of some of those real business arrangements to help other segments of the economy and other segments of the population. So I was impressed this morning, and thank you.
And thank you for that. We'll take note of that. Make sure to double check that we're covering that as much as we can.
Yeah, I'd be remiss if I didn't say this. We talked about what we're doing with wildlife and fisheries, but we're working with Casey Tingle and his team on real-time forecasting and developing better modeling tools for hurricanes and surge and riverine and rainfall. We're working with Dr. Brown and his team. I mean, they were a huge part of Ben Marlborough's pump station for Bayou Lafourche. And so it's not just CPRA doing all of these things. It's really state government working together to accomplish these things. So great point, Ms. Kitson. Did you have something?
Yeah, I thought it was a great presentation, Krista. One thing that I'm reminded of is that we do a great job and continue to get better at outreach across the coast. But I think it's important for us to remember North Louisiana. And several years ago, and Chairman Dre, I believe you were on one of the meetings that we were, I think, in Shreveport, but hit a circuit of Shreveport, Monroe, maybe Alexandria, because, a lot of the general public is not aware of the importance of the coast and benefits to them. Also, the last CPRA meeting, I think it was, we heard about business opportunities for North Louisiana in coastal issues. And I think it's important even more now because it has been a while. And also our legislature has changed. We have a lot of people who don't have the institutional knowledge that our legislators here do today. And I think it would just be a very useful exercise to think about that. And I'm also thinking that the Coastal Commission can play a role in helping to set those up or any aspect of this outreach, in fact. But just want to ask us to keep that in mind. Thank you.
No, that's a great point. And I think that, I said 8 could expand to 10. Maybe we're having 10 meetings because we're going up north and communicating. And it just reminds us all that this is the state's master plan, right? It's not just coastal Louisiana's master plan. It's the state's master plan. So that's a really good point. Thank you.
Go ahead, Lord.
Krista, thank you for your presentation. I just really liked in the 2017 master plan the parish breakdowns, and I'm just making sure that you guys are going to do that in 2023. And is that on the?
Yes, we're planning to report out model results, project benefits, different information about the future of the coast, both at the coastwide level, also looking at 5 regions across the coast, and then also at the parish level, and then even drilling down into some community groupings. So we're trying to report it out locally and then broad picture and everything in between.
Well, and I'd like to just second with what Ms. Gautreaux said, because, it's so important that the northern parts of Louisiana understand, and I think they did when we had, I think it was at Ida or might have been even Laura. I don't even remember which one. They all ran together in my head, but they were having tornado warnings and hurricane watches in like Shreveport and stuff. So it's very important. It was Laura. Thank you. Thank you. But it's very important for us to seize on that and to also, it's still in their memory like it is mine. So to go ahead and make sure that we reach those areas as well.
Absolutely.
Because at some point might actually pass a millage for Southwest Louisiana, and we need the northern states to do that. I mean, the northern parishes to do that as well. Thank you.
That's right. Thank you, Lord. All right. Any other questions for Krista? All right.
Great. Thank you, everyone.
Krista. Appreciate the update. Moving on, members, agenda item number 10. We're going to get an update from Jacqueline Richard with Nunez Community College. Welcome, Ms. Richard. And I just want to, I know that you're going to give a presentation here specific to Nunez, but members, next month, we're going to hear a presentation from the Louisiana Community and Technical Colleges System. Every implementation update that Bryn Haas gives, he gives you the job statistics associated with projects, whether it's a marsh creation project, a levee project, sediment diversion. statistics for us to continue to communicate to the public. But there are future projects that are slated for construction that we know are going to create thousands of jobs in South Louisiana. And so there is a partnership that is formed right now between CPRA and LCTCS, Louisiana Community Technical College System, to where we're going to be working with community colleges across South Louisiana that are training our young men and women in technical trades. And so that when they're coming out of these colleges, that we can help feed them into these jobs to make sure that our citizens are the ones that are getting these jobs. And so obviously Nunez is going to be a huge part of that. It's in when he's got his community college here and he left. I'm sure he'll be back. But I just think it's a great opportunity for CPRA and the community colleges across South Louisiana to make sure that we're training these students for these potential opportunities. And so, Ms. Jacqueline, I want to thank you for being here, and I will turn the floor over to you. I know we don't have this presentation in the packets, members. I think we had a little bit of some technical issues on getting it over, but if you want to email it to us, we'll be happy to get it to the members.
Absolutely.
So, Ms. Richard, thank you for being here.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, members of the board. So I'm coming to you today to talk about Nunez's coastal program, specifically in our workforce development surrounding coastal issues. So as the chairman described, the Louisiana Community College Technical System is an umbrella of 12 community colleges around the state. We are all working in concert and harmony to develop workforce initiatives to help support coastal restoration plan. So I want to highlight what we are doing. Nunez is situated in St. Bernard, and we serve St. Bernard Parish and Plaquemines parishes, which obviously are going to be directly impacted by the mid-Barataria sediment diversions. So to highlight the program specifically, in 2018, the St. Bernard Coastal Development received a Restore grant to help fund, and they chose to help fund the development of the coastal program at Nunez Community College. So I'm going to be walking you through that today. So the Coastal Studies and GIS Technology Program, our mission at Nunez is to help train these students in these technical areas. As was mentioned, we know that there's a lot of people that are in the workforce that come from out of state. It is our goal to help keep locals local, right? We know as far as GIS goes, there's a need, right, in our state to have locals trained in hydrographic surveying, so that way we can have those people in those local jobs. So our goal is to train students in spatial technology to get straight out into the workforce. These words are a little small, but our overall three goals, right, for students to come out of this program knowing is to first have an awareness and knowledge, right, of Louisiana's coast and coastal problems, right, which goes into all sorts of great detail when they can. And then second, right, geospatial technology and data analysis, right? So taking that data, taking meaningful data, which anybody that's in science knows, right? How to take meaningful data is a very important step in the process. And then in turn, bringing that data back and learning how to manage that data. Geospatial technology really requires an immense amount of data storage. So learning how to, a little bit of a timeline on the program itself. From the years 2018 to 2019, this is really when we received the grant to develop the program. The first coastal director, Mr. Martin Mance, really developed the curriculum. Anybody that's in curriculum writing knows that that is no quick feat to do, to write the curriculum and get it passed through Board of Regents, so that way you can have approval and be offered to students. So that took about a year to develop. In 2019, was approved, able to be offered to students. Which we saw the first cohorts coming in, right, in 2020. In 2021, he had 20 plus years of service at University of New Orleans, so we're very grateful to have his expertise. And he really kind of dug into that curriculum to make sure the students were to help support the program. His advisory board and to continue to expand the advisory board to industry partners, right, to get that input. In 2022, we saw our first graduation. We had a program, which is quite exciting to see a new program come through and actually have students graduate. That's always a big feat, right, on the college level. And I am coming to you today as the third program manager as I am taking over the reins to help build in the workforce, right? So it is my hope to help build in certifications and workforce pathways and high school dual enrollment pathways to really help students get into this program and get out directly into the workforce. So the Coastal program itself is offered on 3 different levels. The beauty of this program is students can on-ramp and off-ramp very easily, right? We know that some students are coming to us with needs just to get straight out into the workforce. Other students are coming to us because they want to go on to 4-year colleges. So we want to provide as many on and off ramps as possible so that way they can pick up as many certifications and trainings so that way they're getting out into the workforce in a meaningful way. So the first on and off ramp that a student can choose is the Certificate of Technical Studies. So this is just a concentration in those technical skills itself, like remote sensing. And then, of course, coastal surveying, which we know there's a great demand for in the state. The second is a technical diploma, which adds just a little bit more of coastal sciences into it, so that we have a little bit more of an awareness, right, of the ecology of the system. Is the Associate of Applied Science, right, which is now your well-rounded the math and the liberal arts, right, into that, making them ready to move on to their 4-year institutions. We are working with several universities with those articulation agreements so students can move directly goals, right, without any issues at all. I know there's a quote there at the bottom that's very hard to read because it's small. Our most recent graduates said coming out of this program before his cap and gown was even off of his body. So I was very pleased, right, to come into that program knowing that we're having a huge impact. We have 2 different focuses. You have your coastal environmental focus and then the technical focus. So your coastal environmental focus includes courses like wetland science and environmental law. These are hopefully making a dual enrollment pathway for high schools. So that way students that are kind of a little bit further ahead in their high school studies can start on these trackways if they so desire. And then, of course, the techniques focus is getting those students right in the GIS lab or out into the field, teaching them how to take that meaningful data. So our program's resources, I must say that is not the norm for most universities and especially community colleges. So this is quite pleasing and fantastic. We have the full Esri associated right at our college, which is fantastic. We have Hexagon and Trimble. So we're really training students to go out and take that data use out in the field. And of course, we've also incorporated becoming more and more popular to monitor the health of our wetlands so that way we're not tromping through them, destroying all those beautiful plants that we just put in place. So moving a little bit away from about the full development of the workforce, I did specifically say that, right, we do have a drone course. Yesterday was the and I think we had about 10 students enrolled, so that's quite exciting. Itself is taught by Max Haynes, which is one of our graduates. So it's also great to have somebody who wants to immediately give back, right, to the community upon graduation. Just a little bit. I come to Nunez with drones, so we're hoping to kind of add that in, so that way we can directly start monitoring and helping out, right, where needed, our local parishes and monitoring the. For coastal sciences, we don't just need coastal scientists. We also need everybody from welders and electricians, right, all the way on up. And so we do as well at Nunez. Our welding program is quite fantastic. We have a very robust cohort of students that are coming in every 16 weeks. We offer several degrees, as you can see there. Technical certificate, giving them those technical skills that'll get them workforce, and then the technical diploma. All of these are NCCER programs, so those are nationally accredited programs. And I do want to see if I can get this. There we go. I'll get the video to play. The welding program at Nunez takes part of the Chandeleur Living Shoreline Project in developing these these baskets, right, for oysters. And so the professor uses these baskets as a test, right, essentially at the end of the semester, for the students to show that they can practice certain types of welds, right? We're doing this in a meaningful way, not just practicing on some rebar and throwing it away. We're making oyster baskets, right, to be deployed. I was actually able to attend the first, which happened last year, right before Ida. You can see where we're deploying that oyster reef. And I will say that there was only one basket that was moved during Ida, so that's a pretty good success. The program is out there today, installing 21 more baskets. So I was a little sad I couldn't be out there today, but I really do look forward to seeing their pictures when they come back in from the field. We also have electrical construction program at Nunez as well, where they can also and associates. We also have a CDL program as well. We know that things like dump trucks are going to be needed, right, for some of these programs. So getting students in and out of those, right, as needed is also important. And then, of course, we have our heavy equipment as well, which does provide lots of NCCER training and CDL and OSHA 10 licensing. I do want to take a moment to highlight a great partnership that we do have. While this is not necessarily coastal related, I think it's a great example that maybe we could follow on some other pathways. Many of you are probably aware of the Venture Global, right, the LNG terminal, right, in Plaquemines Parish. Venture Global has essentially paid for students to come take these programs, as we call it Will to Skill, where we offer 3 rotating programs. We kind of circle through construction safety, electrical, and CDL. So a student who can take these courses paid by Venture Global, all of those certifications. How Nunez is already working with Plaquemines Parish and setting a pretty good example, right, for other industries to follow. Here you can see we have a at Nunez. We know that there's a big paradigm shift that's happening in education with certifications, right, being very important to add into our classes. So that way, when students leave into the workforce, and if they want to revisit a 4-year degree later, that's perfectly fine to do, but it leaves us with a very skilled and trained workforce. And so as you can see, right, from the very busy list up there, that we do offer quite a lot of certifications that would support any kind of coastal development and restoration. So with that, if there's any questions about our program, I would be more than happy to answer them. But we are looking to hopefully continue to expand and grow this program in the.
So what a great program. We were just saying maybe after we retire, we need to go take each of those courses. That's wonderful. Now, did you mention our scholarships part of the program? I heard you mention venture, and I apologize if I missed it earlier.
So we do offer scholarships. We actually have a scholarship open currently until next week. So we do have a semesterly scholarship program for students coming into the Coastal Studies program, where they can essentially receive $1,000, right, to help support their studies, which we know is definitely important, especially in today's economy, right, to help those students get in the program.
Great, thank you.
Thank you for reminding me. Mm-hmm.
Go ahead, Patrick.
I agree. I think this is a great program. I'm really impressed with what I heard, and impressed you guys at CPRA help support that. I'm interested. I'm always interested to see what other opportunities are out there for our fishing communities who, in large way, are struggling to stay afloat from a variety of reasons. Are y'all seeing any folks from our fishing community move into these kinds of jobs, transition? Do you know?
We aren't yet, but it is my hope in coming into this role to build those relationships so that way we can help facilitate some of that movement and retraining. Mm-hmm. It's a great question.
Okay. Any other questions for Jacqueline?
Thank you.
Yep. Thank you very much. Really good stuff. All right, members, our caboose for the day is Mr. Todd Baker. He's going to give us an update on a project that I'm really excited about. opportunity to restore the Chandeleur Island.
We're going to drag a whole army of
We've got
people up
more than
here.
Todd here,
Yeah.
for sure.
Oh, yeah.
So,
We do.
wow.
Utah,
Welcome, everybody.
yeah, Utah Partnership. We're showing you
There you
partnership
go.
right
That's
here.
it. That's it.
So, wow, that doesn't show up near as well as I was expecting. Okay. Okay, I'm going to give you an update on the Chandeleur Island Restoration Project, which is currently under engineering and design. With me today, I have with the Fish and Wildlife Service. To my left is Bridget Fairman. She's with our Ecological Services section. And Barrett Forche to my right. He's the senior biologist over Breton National Wildlife Refuge and a number of other refuges as well. And left, he's with the Louisiana Wildlife and Fisheries. And questions at the conclusion of this presentation if you have a question. But also just wanted to take an opportunity to recognize them and thank them, because this has been a teamship and partnership with them and the coastal consultants that have really brought this project from infancy to where it is today and had a great partnership. We've had some really good successes in just engineering and design. And so really looking forward to the partnership moving forward and getting this project over the finish line. Yeah, I see, it's pretty small. So the Islands, I think most of you guys are familiar with where it is, but it's basically in far eastern St. Bernard. It is about 30 miles, a little more than 30 miles south of Biloxi and Gulfport, Mississippi, and about 35 miles east of Hopedale, Louisiana. It's a logistically demanding place to work, very hard to get out there. A lot of the work that needs to be done is with shallow draft vessels, but you need a very deep draft vessel in order to cross Chandeleur Sound to get out there. So it presents a lot of challenges that we've already started to. You're going to hear me talk about uniqueness and the only place in the state and terms like that. So we're going to start off the presentation right there. Chandeleur Island is part of the Breton National Wildlife Refuge. It is the second oldest national wildlife refuge in the country. And it's the only one that our conservation president, Theodore Roosevelt, ever visited. So it's pretty unique from that standpoint. It's also a designated wilderness area, which means there's federal law to protect this area to be a wilderness area, to keep a lot away from the island. This island also was about 12,000 acres in size. And over the last 100 plus years, it's now around 1,000 acres. And it's lost about 89% or more of its total. Because that's the only barrier island system for St. Bernard Parish and Plaquemines Parish. So to talk about getting out there and really restoring this island is very appreciated by our residents. This slide this morning, I realized that's a horrible acronym on the top, so I'm going to start with explaining that. This project is funded by the region-wide trustee implementation group's Restoration Plan and Environmental Assessment #1. To summarize, a lot of times you guys have heard of Louisiana TIG. Well, this is funded by the region first restoration plan that was put out in 2021. So this project came out, and we have $8 million designated to. So we have $8 million designated for engineering design for the Chandeleur Islands that we are moving forward with, and those funds are coming out of the bird pot of funds. TIG. So when we talk about what are the goals of the project, it's really to create habitat. First and foremost, this project is to restore important colony or series of colonies. And I'll touch on that in just a minute. The second goal is to aquatic marine seagrass meadows behind the islands. Submerged marine aquatic meadows are at the Chandeleur Islands. And then we're going to design a project that's going to in just a little bit. And then also to restore habitat. Now, this will not be a typical barrier island project. This is going to be a habitat related project, much like we saw with Queen Bess. Those were bird habitat projects. And this is a whole lot of other species in this project. So where we currently sit in engineering design is we are finishing up phase 1 and moving into phase 2. And phase 1 was really went out and pulled in all the available data in the islands, all the old Viber cores, all the old survey, so that we didn't replicate something information that was already available. And also it would point out to us areas that updated so we can move forward with design. So we've done that. We've did our data gap analysis, and we've already developed plans to go out there and gather the data we need. Showing on the slide now is just a geotech slot permit that was recently submitted. The slide that's covered up is actually the survey, which is almost 300 miles of survey we have to conduct. So are the is basically species accounts at the island for birds, marine seagrass meadows, and sea turtles. So this it's covered up, but the top left screen is the colonial water out there, and they took photographs of New Harbor Island, which is right behind Chandler Island, and they can count each and every nest, get a GPS point on it. And we're looking for the bird nesting habitat, identify it, and having that data will allow us to go into design and further expand those habitats or enhance those habitats. So we'll for using and be able to work that into our design process moving. Unique thing, and I'm glad it's showing, is the picture on the screen. This island actually has its own bird. This is a photograph taken earlier this year of the Chandelier gull. There's herring gulls and kelp gulls that on occasion will nest at the Chandelier Islands, and occasionally they will hybridize, and they produce a offspring that is reproductively viable. That's called the Chandelier gull. So if you want to see a Chandelier gull, you have to go to the Chandelier that they're seeing. We talked about seagrass meadows. One thing I'll point out to you, everything in this presentation are pictures from the Chandelier Islands. Nothing is a representation. This is all actually taken out there. If you look at the picture kind of in the background on the screen, you can see the beach, you can see the grass, but those shadows around are those marine seagrass meadows. The only place that you can find them in Louisiana, and they are the most botanically diverse seagrass meadows found anywhere in the northern Gulf of Mexico, with 5 different species of marine out there. So we're going to go out and hopefully next month and start searching and find out the extent of them, where they are, and more importantly, where they're not. That way, when we roll further into design, we can expand those habitats to help further, which are important to a lot of species that use the chandelier. Man, I really wish this could have shown up. All right. Another thing that we just recently completed, and I'm going to spend some time talking about it, are the sea turtle surveys that we have just recently completed. Monday was our last. When we went back to the data gap analysis and we looked at sea turtles, there was some very spotty information about sea turtles. One survey would say that some were observed. Another survey would say we talked to a fisherman and they saw one out there. But there's really been no complete, thorough survey of sea turtles out there, just a mention here and there of them being present. And really no mention that we could find of nesting, of true nesting, of successful nesting out there, except for one nest that was excavated and hatched out. So we went out and we decided to survey the islands for sea turtles because we didn't want to be in construction. And lo and behold, a sea turtle roll up the nest, and it really throws a wrench in our plans. So Wildlife and Fisheries and CPRA worked together to develop a protocol that was reviewed and approved and by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and we started flying the surveys. And honestly, when we went up to fly, we thought it would be pretty neat if we saw 4 or 5 sea turtle crawls in the period of 3 months worth of surveys. The first day we went up in late May, we found 2. So that was kind of a high five moment. Oh, well, they're here. Well, we just concluded our surveys last month, and it turns out we have documented 53 sea turtle crawls on the Chandelier Islands. And we know that we missed a great deal of those crawls because we had 3 weeks during the peak of nesting season. We were shut down for COVID and other reasons. And also, you guys have seen the rainfall we've had on a near daily basis in July, which erases those crawls pretty quickly. So, so we've documented 53. Over half of those, we believe, have the potential to have a nest. So that was a pretty big deal. No one expected to find that many crawls out on the islands. And working with the service, they've concluded that some of the crawls are loggerhead turtles. So we know at least some of the crawls are nesting loggerhead turtles. But then okay, this one showed up. So this is what the crawl looks like from the air. So what we did was we flew weekly, and the picture on the left is what a sea turtle crawl looks like. And so this is the same crawl in the upper right-hand corner. We would land and go further investigate the crawl, take pictures, get measurements so we could give it to the service so they could further identify the crawl and identify the potential nest. And then I want to call one day, Matt and I were out there walking the beach, looking at those different crawls, and we found this little formation that kind of ran across the beach, and it was kind of odd. It's just a bunch of little lines, bunches of them, 50 to 100 of them. And Matt looked over, and I stopped Matt and said, something's different. Matt looks back at me, he goes, you think this could be a small sea turtle? Them to the water, and they all went to the water, and we came back and had the picture up there, but it came to about an 8-inch hole. And you can see all the little flipper marks going to the hole. I said, well, we actually have a nest that's successfully hatched. So we looked and we looked and we looked, and we actually found 2 of these guys still in the nest. They hadn't made it to the water yet. So we were able to observe them swim, get into the Gulf and swim off, which was pretty cool. So these guys are very difficult to identify when they're small. The species look very similar. So we sent it off to the Fish and Wildlife Service, and they came back and confirmed that this is a Kemp's Ridley sea turtle. And so great, we know we have loggerheads now, we have Kemp's, but this is a significant. Ridley are the most endangered sea turtle in the world and nesting on the Chandeleur Islands. And we're pretty confident that there's more than just one nest out there. So now that we have concluded our surveys, we're wrapping up all that information. We'll get it all, help further identify, breakdown of the crawls and what we have out there. But this was a very significant find. From all the literature search we've done, we can't find where anybody has ever documented a sea turtle crawl or a Kemp's Ridley sea turtle on the Chandeleur Islands. So it's pretty safe to say, and we're going to conservatively say this is the first observed hatching of a Kemp Ridley sea turtle nest in over 75 years on the Chandeleur Islands. So it gives us a little further motivation to get out there and do a really good job in design and make sure we do a project that's going to make the Chandeleur Islands last a very long time. So this is kind of my conclusion slide. What we have to do next is really need to get out there and collect the data so we can begin putting together design alternatives. And then once we have those design alternatives, we can start hopefully this summer going after construction funds or seeking construction funds. It is important to point out that we don't have $1 for construction yet for this project. So we're going to get done with engineering design, get a few alternatives, and then we're going to really dive off into seeking those construction funding opportunities.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks for your presentation. My question is, I know in Rabbit Island in the southwestern part of the state, the only impact that was a construction problem was the actual hatching season of the brown pelican. So I'm assuming, my question is, how does finding the Kemp's Ridley sea turtle impact future construction? And I'm assuming that it's just a hatching period of time that they won't be able to construct during that time. Is that what you foresee as the impacts for the future construction?
Well, one thing I'll start off by saying, I think we have an opportunity to really, restore an island. It's going to be very beneficial to those guys, but that's why I brought these people smarter than me along. I'm going to pass this mic down right here and say, Bridget, that's for you.
Yes. So as the Fish and Wildlife Service, we've been working hand in hand with CPRA throughout this whole process. We already know that we have to do a consultation under the Endangered Species Act. And so especially for sea turtles, I've been working with Fish and Wildlife Service here in Louisiana for 22 years. It's the first time we will ever do a consultation for nesting sea turtles. And as crazy as it sounds, I'm actually excited about it. We will be working with some of our other field offices in other states who have lots of experience in this to figure out what's the best way to work hand in hand with CPRA through that construction process so that once they start construction, they can just keep going and we don't interrupt construction once it gets started, because we understand, time is money. Once you have that dredge out there and everything's mobilized, they have to keep working, especially while the weather is good. So we will have a consultation in place to handle any of those contingencies. And the way we tend to do it for these really big island projects, we like to set it up where we cover more than one alternative. That way, if the contractor for the construction work has to make a last minute change or something, we have all that in place already. So we will take care of all of that through the consultation.
Okay, thank you.
So I have a question about, it was this slide that had the island with, are you expanding the size of the island? Because you talked about we've lost so much, 12,000 down to 1,000 acres. Is this an outline of what you expect it to look like once it's restored, or?
No, ma'am, I apologize for not specifying on that. That is the survey plan for the seagrass beds on the island. So, sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead.
So that drawing you see, let's see, I'm going to back up here so everybody can see what we're talking about.
The honeycomb, yeah.
The honeycomb pattern right there. So that shows that the colors show where the seagrass beds currently are, and those hexagon are the study site that they're going to go out and survey for seagrass beds to find out where obviously we kind of know where they are, but they want to further define and what species are out there and where they're not. To me, it's more important to know why they're there and survey right next door and figure out why they're not, so we can expand those seagrass beds. We don't have any preliminary design data at this time. This is still data collection, so we don't really have a plan. Yeah.
I mean, I was just wondering if the island was going to grow, if that was part of the plan in the future to make it bigger, since we've lost so much. And
well, a lot of that's going to depend on how much funding we can pull down. Certainly, the biggest draw we're going to have is making sure the island that's there lasts as long as possible.
So, I think Barbara kind of unknowingly teed me up there. So, is there, first of all, in the near term, because of the finding of the baby turtles, and is there opportunities for us to seek additional money out of the turtle pot through region wide? I believe you said that there was $8 million.
So there's sea turtle money in both the region wide TIG and in the Louisiana TIG, and certainly we would make an ask for some of those funds.
I think we should. And the Marpaw project was our major project that we received Restore Act funding for. It was $130 million, which is out of the competitive pot where we're competing with the other Gulf states for projects. And so there's going to be another FPL, a funded priorities list, where you could see this project being funded through a larger restoration effort. Yes, the Chandeleur Islands. And so I just think this is a great presentation to end the meeting with, guys. I think it's a beautiful story, but I think it's a great opportunity as well. And Ms. Goodson was in my ear that she wants naming rights for baby turtles. But anyway, no, I think this is a great story. Representative Ray Garofalo was for, he wasn't listening to the meeting, but there have been various press reports on the turtle findings and things of that nature. So fascinating. Yep, go ahead, Dwayne.
You had mentioned a great presentation, good news, and again, that sense of urgency keeps coming back, right? You mentioned that submerged seagrass beds, the metals, is unique to Chandeleur Islands. We don't have it on any other barrier islands in any kind of format. So I think it would be very, very important to kind of get a handle on why that may be the case and what we could do to get it. I wonder on an island that was 12,000 acres at one time, how many acres of that existed as well because of the increase in the size. So that was one thing. The other thing, Chip, I talked to Todd before that there was a PowerPoint version of this that had some animations that we couldn't do here. If maybe you can find a way to send a link to that out, I think it'd be great.
Yeah, we'll be glad to do that. We'll just email it out, make sure that it's PowerPoint. I'm not sure why it converted to a PDF, but we can send that out to the members. And then I'm looking at Marina, if we can maybe just post this on our website somewhere for the public to access as well. Well, we look forward to having all of you back. The full Chandelure family here is what we'll call it for future updates. And so thank all of you for being here. Any more questions or comments for the Chandelure family? Okay. All right. Thank you. Great way to end the meeting, guys. Any public comments? I don't have any public comment cards at this time. It's going on. Mr. Slevstein. As I told Mr. Slevstein, it's good to see him in person. Again.
Thank you. And I'm a reporter with the Times-Picayune, the New Orleans Advocate, as you guys always know. And I am speaking out of turn with no advance warning to my publisher, my employers. Listening to the presentation about the master plan, it struck me that the one thing that's been missing that you guys have had an opportunity to do but have not taken advantage of is to publish a special section in the Times-Picayune that would give a much greater idea of what master plan to the public for much of the state. And I know that we have attempted as the newspaper, I have attempted over the years to do that sort of stuff. And the reality is that, especially now with the finances of running a newspaper, it's very difficult for us. It's pretty amazing these days. If you guys were able to convince the newspaper in some way to do a special section, you would be able to get a heck of a lot more information out there to the public. So I'm throwing that out to you. Be glad to give you whoever you need to contact about that.
No, I appreciate that, Mark, and I think your comments are quite timely because we have a new director of outreach and engagement who can. You might have a rabbit to chase here, Marina, on making that happen. And so I know Brent and Greg were writing down everything you said, but I think that's a great recommendation. So thank you.
Thank you,
Mark. All right. Any other public comments? All right. I've got a motion by Ms. Cormier, a second by Mr. Burke. Again, great to be in. We are adjourned.